Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of our daily chess speedrun. Today we're going to be playing another 10 plus 5 rapid game. In our last game we played the Queen's Gambit for the first time and I showed you an opening which is super effective, and our opponent seemed quite flustered at the endgame that we simplified into, and he made a blunder that cost him the game. And we're hoping to have another clean game today to improve our rating and to just show you some more openings. So let's just get right into it. And I have been super excited. There's been a lot of changes going on in my life. I've been starting to work a new job. I am also preparing to go to school, so I'm making this a priority as well. I'm taking my time and setting some time aside on the schedule. And today we also have the white pieces again, and we are going to start with d4. d4 is an excellent move, and we're going to see what our opponent has to do to respond. We might not get a Queen's Gambit per se, but we may start seeing some more openings like knight f6 on move 1, and we do see knight f6 on move 1, and we are going to just play c4 and see what our opponent does. And our opponent does go for g6, so our opponent, it looks like they're going to be playing a King's Indian or a Grunfeld, and we are going to see what they play. We are going to allow them to play a Grunfeld if they'd like, and they play the King's Indian. And the King's Indian defense is a very solid defense. You can play it against all sorts of different openings. We are going to play a traditional King's Indian with e3 or e4, taking the center, and our opponent will most likely respond with d6. You can also castle, but d6 is the most common move here, disallowing white from playing e5. Now, when you play e5, there are some drawbacks. But in this position, I feel like our opponent is not going to be able to exploit it properly. The main drawback is you're going to be able to break with d6, and it's very strong, and you're going to be able to tear apart white's center. So, I really don't want to allow that. So what I'm going to do is try to play this in a more same-ish kind of fashion. So what we're going to do is we're going to develop our bishop to e3. We're going to prepare to develop our queen. And we're going to try to castle long and play f3, g4, and open up the file over here. This is a very aggressive way to play against the King's Indian. And your opponents usually don't expect it. They want to attack on the king side, and they want to have you attacking on the queen side, as you normally do in a King's Indian. White attacks on the queen side. But in this kind of position, we are not going to allow our opponent to attack us on the king side. We're going to get over to this queen side. We're going to lock it up, and we're just going to play on the king side and attack our opponent. And when our king is on the queen side, there's no attack for him over there. At least not one he's winning. So I really like this idea against the King's Indian, because most King's Indian players play it because they want to have a direct attack. They want to have this very straightforward idea of marching their pawns. They want to play e5, drop their knight back to whatever square. Then they want to advance their pawns forward and attack you. And we don't want to allow any of that. And that's just something we're not interested in. Alright, so we're going to play bishop h6. We want to trade these bishops off. Alright, and he has gone for knight to knight to h5 here, aiming for this square. He wants to intercept the connection between our pieces. We're going to take, trading the bishops. Right, we're gonna let loose our pawn, attacking the knight. His knight might move with tempo. Right, his knight does. And we're just going to start advancing our pawns. We want to open up the side of the board. Our king's going to castle. We're not too worried about his knight. We have given him an outpost, but we can challenge his knight at any time. Possibly with knight h3. Piece of check here. Piece of check here. But of course, this square's covered twice by the queen and the bishop, so we're not worried about that square. This square is also covered by the queen, and the bishop, so we're not really worried about that either. Alright, and here our opponent, rather foolishly, is allowing us to open up the king side. So we're going to take, basically immediately, not even thinking very much about it, we're going to take. And he has to take back with the pawn or the knight. Alright, and our pieces are going to start to develop here. We want to get this knight out. Where does the knight want to go? Well, this knight on e7 is pretty good. I think that's a nice start. It'll be able to trade itself, if required, for a knight that reappears on f3, or on, f4. And our opponent, I think rather foolishly, is continuing to try to open up the king side, but our king is going to castle the other way, bro. We're not going there. This is not, and now he's closing it. Yeah, I don't know. I think our opponent is really losing the plot here. We're going to trade bishops. At least offer the trade of bishops. And our pieces are going to start becoming incredibly active here. We're going to have the rooks on the files that are very likely to open. We're going to have our knight that's going to be able to jump over here. Create all sorts of pressure on some pawns that need to be defended. And our other rook is going to slide over to the g file. And we're just going to have a great time. We're going to pre-move this in case our opponent takes. Okay. And see, our opponent is a King's Indian player. When you have a person who plays a specific opening, you want to understand what types of positions that they're used to playing. This person plays the King's Indian defense, at least somewhat, and the King's Indian defense is all about one thing. It's attacking on the king side of the board, creating an attack, and your opponent is forced to defend. That's something that King's Indian players love to do, is attack on the king side of the board, not on the queen side. But when you play King's Indian defense as white, you're playing it d4, most of the time you're going to play this move b4, and you're going to go for a c5 break, and you're going to try to break open the queen side of the board and invade with your rooks on these files. But since we've flipped the script, we've made our opponent play, if they wanted to have any sort of advantage or play for a win, they had to start with the queen side attack. I see our opponent is realizing that now, and they're going for it, but we're already so many steps ahead of them here. We have really, we've really gotten to them here, and we're going to be able to just create so much pressure that they're going to be unable to, I guess, come back from. I like our knight on this square. restricting the movement of the queen. If he plays this move, take, and if he takes with the pawn, we win this pawn. Takes, take. Let's go with this move first. This is a great move. Putting the rook on the open file. And we're going to be able to attack with our knight in a lot of different ways. Alright, and this knight isn't doing very much. How can we improve it? Well, we could drop this knight up here and then we could back it up with this knight. That's an idea. What's another idea? Well, our knight could go to this square. How could we get it there? Through this square or this square. Doesn't really have very many squares. So we're going to open up a square for the knight like this. Try to force him to make a pawn concession. And eventually we'd like to get a knight to this square. Alright, he's putting his rooks on the king side. I think that is I mean, first of all, that's a mistake for the obvious reason that he blundered a pawn. This pawn is just left hanging. If we take it with our queen, what repercussion is there? I'm not seeing how he opens up this file. He could advance this pawn, but that's just going to open up files for us. Yeah, I don't see what he's planning here. Maybe he has some knight check here. This knight check. Our king jumps up. Is there any sort of fork going on after that? I mean, I guess he could jump to this square. But that's not a fork. We could move our rook. And then from there, where does his knight go? Not really anywhere. Okay, we're going to take the pawn. Notice how this square would be a forking square for the knight and for the king and the queen, but we can just take with the pawns. So you have to notice these kind of squares where your pieces are vulnerable to forks. And I think our opponent has just kind of lost the plot. His rooks are not good on this file. He shouldn't be putting more rooks on the file that's closed. I think a5 was the right idea. He should be playing to open up files on this side of the board. Let's see, we've calculated this. Let's see if there's an improvement that we can make. Is king d2 better? Here. King d2 better than king c2. If we take here, he goes here. King d2 blunders this pawn. King c2, yeah, it doesn't blunder this pawn. Okay, king c2 is the move. And you can go there. Yes, but then once we lift our rook, I'm just not sure where his knight is planning on going. I believe his knight is trapped. I mean, his knight could go here, but then we could double. And yeah, his knight is getting trapped here at some point. You have to be very careful when you attack with your knight and it's just a lone knight, especially when it ends up on the side of the board like it might here. Yeah, yeah, you can be very vulnerable to all sorts of ideas. Yep. And here our opponent, I think, just missed the plot. He missed the knight was just not defensible. I think here his best try is to play this move. And that move, he threatens our queen, but it's a one-move threat. And we're actually threatening to just trade off pieces here favorably, like winning a pawn and trading queens. Well, I mean, not trading queens, but we're pinning the queen. So we're going to have an opportunity to trade the queens and get our knight to that oh so amazing e6 square that we've secured. I mean, he's losing the plot here. And this is an important concept. When your opponent wants to attack, you want to play positionally. When your opponent wants to play positionally, you need to attack them. Here we see that concept in action. Okay. So, let's calculate this out before we make any moves. Takes. Hold on. Take. We take. He's going to take the pawn with his rook. We're going to take here. And his rooks are going to be able to invade and give us some checks, but that's just about it. There's not much there for his rooks. So we're going to open up the file for his rook, unfortunately. But we're going to win a piece, and we're going to be able to trade queens pretty quickly, too. All right, let's calculate this out. Takes. So he wins a rook. But we're going to be able to win a rook back. Yeah, I'm thinking this is just winning. Take. He takes here. We have to take our queen first. Takes the queen. We take back. He promotes. We're going to take here. We're going to have a lot of pawns in this position. It all hinges on the idea that our knight is going to get to this square, and we're going to be able to give a fork. Also notice our pawns. We've got 4 connected. He's got all sorts of weak pawns in this position. We've got opportunities to create pass pawns on multiple sides of the board. This position has to be winning for white. And this is the position I saw. This is the one I was calculating. And yeah, he's just forced to play very passively. Yeah. We have all sorts of opportunities for forks here. We're going to play this move. Giving the check and covering the pawn here. And then we're going to play b3. And we're going to have just the excellent position here. All of our pawns are going to be defended. Our opponent isn't going to have very many options. Alright, and our king is going to come to the defense of this pawn. All of our opponent's pawns are blocked. Alright, we've just created a pass pawn in the center of the board that our opponent's going to have to respond to. Yes, we've given him a pass pawn, but ours is much faster. His king is in no position to stop it. Notice how his king cannot access f7, and if his king were to jump onto e8, we can actually win his rook with a fork. So his pieces are just out of position. And there we go. He makes the final blunder. He jumps his king to e8, not realizing the fork that we can pull off. And yeah, we are just cleaning up in this position. Far too many weak pawns for our opponent to defend. And we are just loving positions that look like this. Notice we won't want to advance here because his rook is going to slide over. We actually just want to slide our king over like this. We're going to defend. Opponent has a lot of time. His rook is very well placed. Notice we have a rook behind the passed pawn. That's the ultimate mechanism. He's calculated. Yeah, this is an interesting game here. Next time our opponent cannot promote. If he promotes to a queen, we take, he takes, and then we get promotion to a queen. So here we're kind of at a stalemate. Eventually his king is going to have to move. Now that his rook is no longer restricting our king, we're going to have access to a lot of these weak pawns. This pawn's weak, this pawn is weak. So it's going to be whose king can access the weak pawns first. He should promote here, but he doesn't. And now his rook is stuck. And yeah, I think we're starting to get the opportunity, the advance. We're getting the opportunity to win here for sure. Our opponent really is losing the plot here. We're getting the opposition. We're going to gain this pawn here. He advances. And yeah, we've gained the opposition. Our opponent can't defend this pawn. He moves his rook over with check. But we can move our king over, and he has to defend this. He can't allow us to advance. And we're just going to run our king over. And yeah, we are going to win this game pretty smoothly. So there's two strategies here. There's to play to win this pawn, and there's also the strategy of covering the square, the promotion square, getting our king there so that our opponent is forced to make some sort of concession. All right. Our opponent has pinned the pawn, and he does resign. So yeah, I would like to go over this game pretty quickly, and I think it would be a good one to go over because of the opening. King's Indian is a very popular opening. It's played mostly by attacking players who want to attack players who play d4. Because a lot of d4 players want a very positional kind of game. They want to play very solid, smooth games where they gradually improve their position and eventually they win due to some positional advantage they've gained. But we, as e4 players, primarily like to attack. So we're going to kick it to our opponents when we can. When they play the King's Indian, we're not going to just play in a very boring traditional style where we close the center as fast as possible and we don't attack. We want to close the center and attack on sides of the board. That's our strategy. We're going to play it more like a Sicilian. And in Sicilian, a lot of the time you play f3 as white and you attack with g4, h5. We didn't play g4, h5 in this game, but we got to attack. We traded off the bishops. We played g4, h4, and our opponent beats us to the punch with h5. We would have played h5 ourselves, so he beats us to the punch, allowing us to open up the g file, which is eventually where our rook is going to end up. He advances. I think trading here was probably better. He wants to open up the file, not close it. But when he played f4, I felt like this is a bad idea because his rook is closed off. If he's going to really attack on the king side, he may as well go and open it up. But he closes it. And so here his plan is kind of odd. His queen is aiming at a pawn that's being defended. His knight's on the side of the board. His other knight has nowhere to go, really. Nowhere to go that's good, at least. Let's see. Our rook gets an excellent file where the king is just waiting for us. And our knights end up redeploying. This knight gets trapped on the side of the board as well. So his knights, both of them, are just creating no pressure. They have no squares to go to, and they're just very weak. And we see that the piece placement is good. This knight, while it looked kind of weak because of this move, now we see we're attacking this weak pawn, and there's really not a good way for him to defend it because of all the other factors in the position. He could drop his rook back, but he's going to lose this knight. He's going to lose this knight. All sorts of things are going to go wrong. It's by miracle that he actually is able to save this position somewhat and get this endgame. And this endgame, while it does look like, oh, he has two rooks, we've got so many pawns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pawns to just 4. And we've got this knight that, while it looks, oh, it's a knight for a rook's better, this knight is not just a normal knight. It's invading his position. It has access to this key square e6 where it's attacking like a million squares. It has so much control. And we can also defend all of our pawns in this position. I thought we couldn't originally, but then I realized, wait, when he steps his king to f7, we can give this check defending the pawn, and then we can defend our pawns even more. And here he simplifies the position for us even more. Now we have the outside pass pawn, and we can play for that. So that's what we do. And our opponent is able to get some pressure with the rook, but I think the key idea here was seeing this c5 move. Now this move may be quite difficult to see for many, but it's something that I see intuitively because I've seen a lot of chess games. The idea of sacrificing a pawn to create your own pass pawn is one that is very old and has won a lot of games for me and many other players. And you just have to calculate that when they take and you advance, how are they going to stop the pawn? Well, notice that this rook is restricted from f7. It can't defend the file this way. This rook can go to the 7th rank and defend, but this pawn will be able to advance. Also, I'm noticing that the king cannot get over here. The king cannot go to e7 because of the fork, and the king can't go to f7 because the knight's covering it. So the control over the squares that we have is what gives us the opportunity here. And here our opponent is so desperate. He says, "Oh man, this pawn has two more squares until it's going to promote. We have to stop it." And he just makes a move very quickly, and we're able to trade our pieces. And now we're just up 2 pawns for nothing. There's no rook advantage or anything that we have to deal with. And of course, the endgame advantage isn't super clean, but we are able to, with the power of the outside pass pawn, we're able to create a lot of pressure, and our opponent is unable to sustain the position. We get into this sort of rook stalemate where the first one to promote is going to lose. If I promoted here, he takes, I have to take back, and then this pawn promotes. But notice how it's the same thing here. If he promotes, I'll take, he'll take, and then I'll get a queen. So whoever takes first is going, or whoever advances their pawn first is going to end up with the rook, and the other person ends up with the queen. So we don't want to, neither of us are going to do that. We realize it's a stalemate. And since his rook has left the thing here, I'm realizing, hey, he can't do anything now. Now, in this position, I feel like king to d2 would have been more accurate. Why? Because I'm covering the square with my king, and I could take like this. But in this position where I played king d3, I just wanted to cover more squares and be opposed to the king, but I actually should have just gone to d2 because it also creates the distant opposition. Distant opposition is an idea in chess where you want to be, first of all, you want to be 1 square apart from the king, but also you want to be 3 squares. You don't want to be 2 squares because your king can step forward and block the squares. Both kings are trying to invade the other's territory, and you want your king to be the second one there. I'll show you. So if I go like this, and opponent goes like this, his king is blocking all these squares for me. But if I went here, and he advanced here, and then I get to be the one here who's here first, and now his king has to move. His king will step back. And we see this later, that our kings are both trying to outflank each other. They restrict each other's territory, and you want to be the second one there so that the other person they're forced to move their king. But anyways, this would have been bad because he could, our king was on this square. This would have been bad because he could win our pawn. I noticed this, and I thought this endgame would be a lot more difficult to win. But he didn't notice that he could promote there and win the pawn. So I'm glad he didn't go for it. He advanced his king, and we just won the pawn cleanly. and we got opposition here. Noticing that we're restricting his king from being involved, and his king had to step back. Now we step forward, and now this square is already being restricted, but this square is taken, and he stepped back even further instead of giving us opposition like this. Again, we don't have to worry about opposition as much because we have waiting moves. We can just move our rook, and he's going to be forced to move, but he doesn't have waiting moves. His pawns can't move. This pawn can't move because it blunders it. This pawn literally can't move, and his rook can't move because we'll just promote. His rook can move with check, but it has to go right back, so it's not even a big deal. Here he gives up the pawn, his rook moves, and then we realize we can sit here and wait around for his king to move, but he's just going to keep giving us checks. And I also realized, hey, he's going to keep giving us checks. There's nowhere for our king to hide. There's no pawns to hide behind. We could go all the way back here, but that's not a great position for our king. So I decided we're just going to run our king over to the corner, and we have so much time here that he has no way to promote his pawn in time. So we get this position where we've got a queen and a rook for his pawn that's not even going to promote, and then he just resigns. So I hope you guys enjoyed this game. Our opponent played pretty well, and I think in the end game they kind of lost the plot, and it just shows you you want to play for ideas. You know, the computer tells you the best move, but we as humans only understand chess through ideas and variations. So if you see something yourself, or you notice that when someone plays this opening, they always play like this, it's because it's a routine for them, and you want to take them out of their routine. And when you take someone out of their routine, give them a position they're uncomfortable with, you find that quickly they fall apart, and they don't know what to do. So that's the goal. Get your opponent in a position they're uncomfortable with, and then beat them at a game that you're more comfortable with. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this game. I think the King's Indian defense is really fun to play against, and I hope we get to play against it again soon. And I hope you enjoy your day. See ya.